Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Please let us know where you're dialing in from. Feel free to drop your city or your town in the chat. We'd love to know where you're all dialing in from. Happy Tuesday, folks. Love that.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you, sis?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, really good. Good to be on with you.
It's great to be on with you. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be getting started shortly. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Joy. Hey, Jerica. How you guys doing?
We're doing
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Well, I am so excited for tonight's conversation. And I just want to encourage all the folks who are joining and tuning in, just to let us know where you're dialing in from, where in the movement, what city, what state. But tonight's show, we are really focused on the movement and review. On Justice Now, we cover a whole host of topics throughout the year. But I think it's really important for us to take a step back as we look forward to 2023 and talk about where we've been and where we're going. So I'm so excited to be joined by my amazing colleagues at the National Urban League doing the work in the movement. Our President and CEO, Mark H. Morial, the Honorable Mark H. Morial, and my sister in this work, Joy Olivia Cheney. Joy is the Executive Director of the National Urban League's Washington Bureau, and she is the Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy at the League. Mark, Joy, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jerica, and thank you so much for your leadership and for the great success of Justice Now.
Yeah, it is a great success. We love it. We love it over at the State of Black America podcast. We plug you guys all the time.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that. So speaking of success, why don't we just jump right in? Mark, Joy, as we look back at 2022, we know the League has been involved in advocacy on a host of issues. And so I would love to hear from you, Mark, and then Joy. If you can name one or two really key moments in 2023, what were the wins? What were the accomplishments?
Thank you very much. And basic to everyone, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and happy Kwanzaa. I would say that the Reclaim Your Vote campaign and the way in which the movement engaged in the civic processes of this nation, pushing back on voter suppression, notwithstanding the fact that we were not successful in passing legislation through Congress to shut down voter suppression. Voters across the country, advocates and grassroots leaders and electeds push back to ensure that people would vote in this election. And I think that our Reclaim Your Vote campaign, which was a team effort, a joint effort between the National Urban League and the affiliate movement and our volunteers, and led, Jerica, by you and your team, was enormously successful, given the odds, given the predictions, given the pundits, given the pollsters, given the conspiracy theorists, given the spin meisters, spin doctors. I call them the spin witch doctors.
Can we borrow that?
You got it. And they, notwithstanding that, I think that was a success. I think Joy can talk about a number of legislative successes. I think for the movement as well, this was the year we pivoted back to in-person engagement. We had a powerful retreat in New Orleans in May of this year. We had a in-person conference for the first time since 2019. We had in-person board meetings and in-person convenings for Whitney Young, our professional development. And yes, of course, in the early part of the year, we did LPC virtual, but it was because we were listening to our constituents who told us, not yet, we're not ready to come back live. Give us a minute. Remember, last winter, COVID was still raging.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of the movement. We got a chance to meet, greet, see each other, engage with each other, fellowship with each other. I was extremely excited to see everyone, and I think that's a part of the movement. The other thing I want to highlight, and this is so important, 25 Urban League affiliates received an unprecedented gift due to the generosity of Mackenzie Scott, who has leaned in to supporting racial justice and racial justice organizations in a significant way. Her gifts to the National Urban League, to historically Black colleges and universities 2 years ago, are now gifts to our affiliates. Really, really powerful and really spectacular endorsement of the work on the ground. So I am going to let you talk to Joy. Jack, I'm going to step away. I have a little bit of a situation I'm dealing with. I'll be back in a minute.
No,
keep talking.
We understand.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, it's live. It's live.
Right. And Joy, I think that was a really important part. Mark touched on a number of things that have happened in the league, but really our affiliates have found themselves on the front lines of so many social justice issues and policy issues of our time. And you really have been on the front lines there in Washington, working with the administration and Congress and Senate on a whole host of these issues. From a national level, really looking down at what has really emanated on the national policy level. What have been the big wins that we know will have a profound impact on our movement?
Absolutely. Not looking down, looking out. Not looking out, right? Just want to make clear. And really looking up, because the nation told us what they wanted their priorities to be at the federal level. And I'm going to start where Mark left off, voting rights. We started 2022 fighting for voting rights. The Freedom to Vote, John Lewis, Voting Rights Advancement Act. And you might be saying, well, how can you say that's a win because you didn't win, right? Ultimately, the filibuster, as it has done for many decades, got in the way of our civil rights. But that said, we raised the nation's consciousness about the attacks that were happening on voting rights. And we did so constructively, not so that people wouldn't vote because they felt like, gee shucks, there's nothing we can do, but because we reminded them of how important their vote was, and that if we wanted to protect the right to vote, we had to get out there and vote. And that when it led to the president ultimately signing a voting rights executive order where he fought to do the things that the executive branch could do that were aimed at making sure every federal agency had done everything within its power to increase access to the ballot box and to get people registered to vote. So even though we didn't get the permanent fix and the expansive fix to campaign finance reform and governance and all of the things that we wanted, what we did was we raised the consciousness. People understood voting rights were under attack, that they needed to vote, and then the president understood just how serious we were, and we needed to have some kind of executive order on his part to make sure we had done everything we had to get people out to vote. So that to me is just a piggyback on what Mark just said. Other things we worked on is we fought to defend and lay the groundwork for Ketanji Brown Jackson. Speaking of elections mattering, right? There were a lot of women's groups who led the way on that and a lot of legal justice groups, but we were right alongside them. and making sure, and I think the last time I was on, we were talking about that. That had just happened. And
We
you
actually
and Fatima
were
got
the power of our federal courts.
yes, and we kept
really
saying justice. Oh my gosh, Ketanji Brown Jackson. We are seeing, we knew, but like I don't even think we really knew until we saw her in that first case. Just how meaningful it would be to have her on the court, asking the questions in the way that we all see it, right? Not getting into a debate of, are you an originalist, or are you do you believe in a living, breathing constitution? Both, right? And even as originally intent, the founders saw race. So having her say that, and I really still want on a T-shirt, I'm trying to understand your point. Which brought all the sisterhood on
right.
the Supreme
Look,
Court.
that was Black excellence, Black girl magic at its finest, Joy.
At its finest. And so, that reminding people that courts matter when they go and vote. And then there were other things too. And I Mark talked about some things that are kind of behind the scenes, but I want you guys to know about behind the scenes things we work on, making sure that and that our program team works on, that the infrastructure bill that we passed, the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, that the IIJA, or some people call it the bipartisan infrastructure bill, whatever you call it, that it ultimately had so many investments for our community, that the American Rescue Plan before it had so many investments for our community, that the CHIPS bill and the Inflation Reduction Act that were passed this year had so many investments. But these investments mean very little if you do not make sure they actually get to the communities you serve. So it's one thing, passing the bill is sort of like a start, but then you actually have to make sure that bill is implemented, and that you are people are being held accountable, and that you are doing.
Oh, Joy, I think we lost you for a second.
Process that you have to engage with the executive branch. So we are just, so those are the things that I think are huge wins for us. Mark, I just was brilliant. You missed it. But no, those are the things as we wrap up.
There was someone calling, pretending to be Santa Claus.
Oh, all right.
They were pretending, and I said, I only want to speak to the real Santa Claus.
Hey, Mark, you only talk to the top, the principal.
Yeah, I want to talk to the real Santa. And so thank you for your indulgence. Yeah, go ahead. And
No. I just said, hey, for us, we started the year with voting rights, and even if we didn't win, we raised the consciousness, right? So we talked about that. We talked about Ketanji Brown Jackson, KBJ. We talked, thirdly, Mark, this is where I was ending, about how all of the Urban League has been engaged, not just in the passage of some of these huge investment bills, but the implementation of it.
Yeah.
We have to make the connection. So those are the wins that, and then, there's the policing. I'm going to add one more, right? The policing executive order, but I know we're going to get to that later. Go ahead, girl.
Well, I think that, Jerica led our 21 Pillars tour.
Yeah.
And Jerica, you may have noted that the police officers in the Ronald Green case in Louisiana were indicted.
Yeah.
The Urban League lent its advocacy voice to bringing pressure on that, and we have to continue to monitor that case and continue to bring pressure. I think some of the work that gets lost in the big political conversation is how effective and aggressive the Justice Department under Merrick Garland and Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark have been in bringing cases to enforce the civil rights laws, maximizing their power and their authority to enforce the laws. And that's a very significant part of our work. A part of our work is passing new laws. Another part of our work is ensuring that the laws that generations of people have placed on the books to protect civil, constitutional, and human rights are enforced by the executive branch and enforced by the courts.
Right.
And that's so significant. And so the 21 pillars was really a highlight this year, I think. The summit, the United We Stand Summit, Joy, at the White House.
Yes.
In the wake of the tragedy in Buffalo.
Yeah.
And the tragedy in Uvalde. We came together with our friends from ADL and NAN and
Asian Americans Advancing
Asian Americans
Justice,
Advancing
and
Justice,
LULAC.
and LULAC, bringing together Latino, Asian, Jewish, African American focused civil rights leaders together to call on the White House. And the White House responded. And I give a lot of credit to Senior Advisor Susan Rice and her team. Really stewarded an excellent elevation of these issues. As the year ends, let's not miss the significance of the January 6th Commission. I want to lift up for compliment Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi, who's been a bit of an unsung hero in this process in stewarding with care, diligence, and in a methodical way, an effort to find, locate, and elevate the evidence surrounding one of the low days in American history.
Yeah.
January 6th is a low day in American history. There's no way to twist it, turn it, spin it, contort it into anything other, but I have to use the term that is true. And the term that's true is that we witnessed for the first time in American history an attempted coup. And the remarkable thing about it, it was being led by the then President of the United States. And let me say for the record, what is the position of the National Urban League? Our position is no person is above the law. Our position is, yes, isn't it extraordinary that a president might face criminal charges? Yes, but the actions of the then president were extraordinary, out of the norm, beyond the pale, inconsistent with the traditions of our commanders in chief and our chief executives who led this nation historically. So what that punctuated is that 2022 was a year where, whether it was on the legislative front, in the court of public opinion, in thought leadership, we work to protect democracy. We work to protect the rule of law, and we work to protect it, even though historically the rule of law was used to oppress, subjugate, demean, and define us as second-class citizens. Our communities here still kept the faith in the American constitutional system. And in 2022, I'm proud we lifted it up. And I'm proud of the two of you all for your efforts and for your work and for your passion and advocacy in that regard. This is so important to the work that we do. I want to make one other point because, Joy, you mentioned implementation. What does that mean? Well, in 2022, the National Urban League expanded its jobs programs in a significant way through an expansion of our partnership with the Department of Labor. Our reentry programs, our apprenticeship programs, now apprenticing people to work in the renewable energy industry, our urban tech initiative to help people get jobs in the technology sector, all are a result of our ability to leverage the passage of the American Rescue Plan and this new administration's focus on domestic economic health. And then in the business arena, small business arena, through an expanded partnership with the Small Business Administration, we are serving more small business owners than ever before. In the housing arena, providing support to literally tens of thousands of people each year and helping thousands become homeowners. We're implementers. We are, as I like to say, a do tank. Not just a think tank, not just a talk tank, but a do tank. And this is why The do tank work doesn't always get front page news, doesn't always generate sizzle on the reels of MSNBC, CNN, or Instagram. But it is the do tank work where we are serving people and taking justice involved men and women and helping them get jobs, people that have small businesses and helping them grow it, families that say, I want to become a homeowner and helping them get there. This work is so important, and the National Urban League and the Urban League affiliates and the Urban League movement are singular in our ability to do that work from an economic justice and civil rights point of view. With equity is in everything we do. We don't need a white paper or some subject matter expert to tell us about equity. We practice it every day. Single day in our policy, in our programs, in our thought leadership.
Mark, can I jump in? I'm sorry, one thing I want to say, we also use it in our advocacy. One of the reasons people come to us is we don't have to just talk about what we read about, right? We can actually say, this is the experience our affiliates are seeing on the ground, and sometimes that jives with what everyone's talking about in Washington, D.C. Sometimes it doesn't. And we're able to say, you know what, that hasn't been our experience. That's not what we are hearing from the communities we serve. So we get to be, I think, an authentic voice, not just an ivory tower, I read about it in that said white paper. So that's what makes, I think, our work special. And in particular, why I like working for the Urban League, because we're not just in the Beltway. And we're not just in boardrooms of New York or in some epicenters. We are on the street, and we are engaging with people in providing that service delivery work. And I think that's what makes it special.
I definitely agree with all the sentiments that you all shared, how important it is for us to connect with the community and really elevate the voice of the community. A lot of the things that Mark alluded to in some way, shape, or form, I really see it as restorative justice and restoration and making our people whole and have more access to opportunity. And so I do want to talk about 2023 and what's ahead. Joy, I know you host the League's podcast. And I'm sure there is a number of amazing shows that you already have on tap for us. Would love to hear from you about what you are aiming to lift up in 2023. And then I want to turn to Mark to kind of close us out and give us his final thoughts on where we're going in 2023 as we move forward.
Well, let me just say, last week we put out a podcast with Jeffrey Starks, Commissioner of the FCC. We taped it a bit before, but we were waiting to get it out. And we put it out on digital discrimination and things that are happening at the FCC. Speaking of implementation, everyone, there is an affordable connectivity program out there that will help you afford broadband, right? So that you can be watching this not just on your phone, but also on your device, because we know that is what allows you to be able to work from home, to be able to do health visits, to be able to do so much. So that's a lot of work that we fought on in 2021, and then the implementation of the IIJA in 2022. I talked about that earlier. But the next thing we're talking about is crypto. We're doing tomorrow, we actually have a year in, sort of like the one that we're doing. But our first podcast of the year was with Kristen Johnson from the CFTC, where we will be talking about cryptocurrency. And we're digging deep for the first podcast. But we're making it exciting. Don't let your eyes glaze over. But because so many of our communities they're hopeful and they want to see what these new technologies can have, but there are some pitfalls. And so we wanted to really 101 break it down for people. Honestly, that's what we are going to be doing in 2023. We know we have some changes in Congress. The Republicans have control of the House by a slim margin, but it is what it is. The Senate, Democrats still hold control by a larger margin than they did before. And then, of course, we still have the presidency. So our goal will be to continue to make sure we have confirmed judges. We want to, Mark's going to talk about his friend from the Fifth Circuit in a second. I know he is. We're going to continue to have confirmed administration officials. This is important. This is why elections matter. And those judges are there for a lifetime appointment. We are also going to continue to work on criminal justice, because that's an area where we have seen success on a bipartisan level. Now, friends, Mark knows I was harassing him even today about what we can do in the last final moments to get these omnibus bills. But it's not all that, you know, so we're not going to be able to get everything done that we want. But we can have some synergies around the issues that Jerica, you lead, and criminal justice. And so we want to see that work. And we're going to fight on voting rights too. And I think the fourth thing I'll mention, and I'll end with this, is we have to make sure that as we come out of pandemic and we begin to end some of the emergency designations, we do so in a way that does not leave people behind. Many people are still struggling. And so we can't leave that behind. So those are going to be just really honing in on that. And then fifth is the implementation, which we've already talked about.
That's great, Joy. Thank you so much for your leadership. And I'm looking forward to the podcast, because I really think it's so important for us to focus on public education. There are so many issues that we don't get the opportunity to dive into as much as we should. And I just applaud you and your team for doing that work. And I know my team will be tuning in to hear more about crypto and all the other things.
Uncle who's going to talk about it over the Christmas turkey.
All right, Mark, Christmas turkey, you know, look, there's much for us to celebrate this year, but what, in your view, do we need to focus on in the year ahead?
I just want to say a couple of things. I had a great chance to have breakfast this morning with now Judge Dana Douglas, the newest member of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. She is the first Black woman. She's the first openly LGBTQ member of that court, and she's been a great friend and her. I've watched her career and nurtured her career for a long time. Very impressive. She spent the last 5 years as a federal magistrate, and so very excited. And that is the segue to emphasizing something Joy just mentioned. We have to singularly every day wake up and think about the confirmation of the nearly 100 vacancies in the federal judiciary. We have to push the process so that there are nominees, push the background process, push the confirmation process. We have got to focus on the reshaping of the federal judiciary over the next really 12 months to 14 months. Because once we get into an election cycle in 24, obstructionism becomes the rule of the day. So that's a focus on the public policy front. Second on the public policy front, not oft mentioned, but mentioned and high priority for the National Urban League, is the equitable implementation of the big four bills that we helped pass over the last 2 years. The American Rescue Plan, for which there remains money in the pipeline at cities and school districts and states across the nation. Number two, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is really a jobs bill, $1 trillion over the next 10 years. We have got to focus on this for the next 10 years and how it is implemented. We can't just chase new legislation. We've got to focus on execution of what we pass. So Rescue Plan 1, bipartisan infrastructure law 2. Number 3 is what is known as the science bill and manufacturing bill. Money to be invested to help America regain its edge in manufacturing, particularly microchips that are part of everything we use. My car broke down about a year and a half ago. I thought it was, they said, oh, the transmission is out. I said, well, you should be able to fix that in one day. They said, no, sir, we need a chip. Yeah. And they're on back order for 90 days. So for almost 3.5 to 4 months, my personal car was undrivable due to the fact that as an American economy, we're dependent on the manufacture of microchips in Taiwan and other Asian countries. This bill would say, let's build the microchips here. Well, we've got to make sure if that happens, that those jobs don't bypass the cities.
Yes.
That those jobs don't bypass Black workers.
Yeah.
That those jobs don't bypass Latino workers. That those jobs don't bypass women. We have to make sure in the implementation that it's done in a way where everyone benefits. So that's number 3, the science bill. Number 4, the Inflation Reduction Act had a basket of provisions related to renewable energy.
That's right.
Very, very generous tax credits that will benefit consumers who want to buy an electric vehicle, that will benefit businesses that want to build solar panels, wind turbines, and other renewable components. Again, we have to make sure that those jobs and those business opportunities don't bypass Black America, Latino workers, women, Black and Latino-owned businesses.
That's right.
This is, I mentioned this to President Biden when we met with him in the Oval Office, because we have to focus on democracy and focus on voting rights. But remember, the purpose of it is to get us at the table so that we can implement and execute legislation and executive actions that benefit and work for all Americans and not leave our communities out. So the big 4 and the National Urban League's strategies to help implement, keep the pressure on not only the federal government, on the states, on the cities, on the counties, on the private sector, across the board. And then certainly voting rights, voting rights, voting rights, democracy, democracy, democracy. Every single day we will say it is a tragedy that this nation in 2022 has allowed the Supreme Court 10 years ago to gut the voting rights bill that was passed in the aftermath of the confrontation on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where John Lewis almost lost his life. And 10 years later, we've not seen the courage across the board, particularly from conservative members of Congress, to restore the breach to American democracy. We cannot let that go simply because someone else may control, or the change in the congressional control may have been modified. We got to keep that in the conversation. We have to keep that. I saw Senator Warnock, and they said Brad Rassenberger down and said, well, even though voter suppression happened, people turned out to vote. What's the point? The point is you made it more difficult. You cut back on early voting in Georgia. You changed the polling hours to 7 to 7. You engaged in unnecessary restrictions. And these restrictions make it convenient and easy for people to vote. Voting in the franchise is basic. It's foundational to who we are as a nation.
People shouldn't have to overcome you to vote.
No.
And worse than them not, attacking the Voting Rights Act at the federal level is they began to attack it at the state and local level, and an onslaught in almost every state in the land. Let me, just add a couple of one other thing, Mark and Jerica. I know you will agree because we both have we all have legal backgrounds. We also have to defend the wins that we've gotten, and some of that will have to be in court through the amicus process, through letters, through other means. There are people who don't like the wins that we've all been talking about here. One of them that we didn't talk about was in ensuring that we're dealing with the student loan debt crisis.
Yep, they challenged it in court.
They're challenging it in court, making sure that we have a CFPB, that is holding banks and others accountable for giving loans and engaging with communities of color that support them, right? Making sure that they have products that are non-discriminatory. We are, as we're doing that work, as we are celebrating that work, there are those on the other side who are fighting us tooth and nail. Yeah. And so part of what we are going to have to do is defend that. And then we have this woke capitalism fight that's going on out there in a nation that are attacking corporations who have done investments in communities of color. So we have to be out there defending the wins, forging ahead, trying to get additional wins, but defending the wins that we have, and then trying to make real the wins that we got. So it's a lot. We got a lot on tap for 2023.
We sure do. I mean, Joy, Mark, I mean, you've outlined it. You've given us our marching orders. There is so much work to do. But while it's a huge responsibility, it's also a huge opportunity. You know, accountability is on all of us. And so I think the lesson from tonight's conversation is that the fight for justice, the fight for equity, the fight for opportunity, it never ends. It's to be continued. Yes. And it is important that we acknowledge the wins we've made, but that we also continue to press on in hopes of creating an even better and brighter future.
Jerica, can I add one thing?
Of course, Joy.
One of the things that we want your viewers to do, our collective viewers, is you're going to have to ask your states and localities what they're doing with their federal money. That's a question that you, Mark, and I will be asking everyone that we can reach. And we're going to be asking the federal government what they are in, what kind of, safe guardrails they're putting in place. But just like you go, you have to go to talk about voting rights locally. You have to go to talk about policing locally. You're also going to have to say, hey, Mark just talked about 4 bills. There are a lot of federal dollars coming through our state. Where's that money going?
Where's the money?
We need you to do that. We'll be enlisting your help. But whether you hear from us or not on it, you have got to say, show me the money. Where is it? My community needs to feel it.
Thank you, Joy, for that. Thank you, Mark. It has been a conversation.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on the success of Justice Now.
Yes.
Again, thank you to you and your team, and thank you, Joy. And Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays and Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you for tuning in. We look forward to catching up with you in 2023. Remember, the time for justice is always now. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.